Okay, hello and welcome everyone to this first roundtable in what is called our Mobility Methodology series at Pedestrian Space. This is a roundtable for the Global Walkability Correspondents Network. This series, Mobility Methodology series, is hosted by the Academia and Engagement Working Group. And we established this series because we have in our network, our very international and multidisciplinary growing network, several master's students, PhD students, as well as professors who work with walkability in some way in their work and who have explored using various methodologies in their theses and dissertations. So we thought it would be really interesting to start a series to showcase the various methodologies. And also the series will be welcoming practitioners and professionals who in some way incorporate walkability in their work, often something related to the city. So I'm really excited because this is the first one and it is featuring Vienna-based Roxani Gkavra, who did her thesis on the spatial analysis of citizens' walkability perceptions in Thessaloniki. She has a presentation prepared and then we can go into Q&A after that. So thank you, Roxani.
Thanks for the presentation. Should I share my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you can, hopefully you can see the screen. Yes, exactly as Anika said, it's part of my actually first bachelor master thesis when I was in Greece, and we analyzed the perception of walkability from the pedestrian's perspective. Just a few short introduction on me. I'm based in Vienna currently. I'm actually coming from Thessaloniki, Greece, and in Vienna I'm doing my PhD and also work as a research associate at Boku University. Before that, I lived in the Netherlands, where I explored the cycling world, and I did my master in transport planning there at Delft University. And as I said, I started from Thessaloniki in my civil engineering background. So very glad to be here and looking forward to more presentations after mine to also learn a lot from everyone. So why you're here today, let's start very typically Greek. I have a quote from Hippocrates, because walking is man's best medicine. More specifically, because we try to identify all the benefits from walking and what it can do to our society. And looking deeper into the methodology, the motivation for this work started about looking how can we assess the infrastructure. So the work took place at 2017. And even until then, walkability was not that common notion in the papers we were seeing or the thesis that we were looking around for pedestrians' perception. It was still more level of service, let's say. But then we want to have a more user-friendly and user-centered approach, and to include not only, let's say, objective measures, but also subjective ones. And in that sense, we had the walkability defined as the way the built environment influences walking. That's not our definition. This is where we started from as one of the many possible definitions of walkability out there. And as I said, we wanted to go a little bit further away from the vehicle-based assessment of the travel experience, and we moved from the objectively assessed to the perceived walkability. And we used a self-administrated questionnaires and personal interviews as part of this. We focused more on now focus on the self-administered questionnaires or surveys, but also taking advantage of the GIS systems in the analysis part. So this is the focus of my past research, and in specific in a Greek case study. That's why the title is called Assessment of Walkability in Thessaloniki's Urban Environment via Individual Perceptions. And it's based on a paper we published some years ago. You can all access it. I'll also have the link in the end for more details. And I was not sure how experts is the audience here, so I will just give a view on the descriptive part and how more or less we can assess the walkability with this method. So the contribution of such a research can be for science itself, as we do in academia, but also for practice. So by taking advantage of this, being able to develop a new survey tool for Greece, we focused on the identification of the factors that affect and could increase the walkability, but also at the same time, we tried to recognize the most problematic areas in the city. So it was quite a case study specific survey that we did. And a little intro to Thessaloniki, if you're familiar or not. Thessaloniki is the second largest city in Greece. It's around 1 million, let's say. It's quite a student city life, but also a pretty dense urban environment for at least the Greek landscape. And it has a nice seafront side, which is quite walkable, but it's also quite hilly in, let's say, 30% of its area. It has a few squares like this one, but this is actually the main central square. But also it's very car-based. So it is a city where it's very common to have cars or motorcycles parked on the pavement, who have quite a lot of let's say, disobedience in the basic traffic lights for pedestrians. So looking at this area, the first thing we thought was we cannot do a very much detailed research and not include the basic characteristics of walkability, which is like if someone can actually walk around. And we started from there. So we started from the functional characteristics. Looking at the literature, we found like these 4 big groups of pedestrian experiences characteristics, which is the first is the functional characteristics, which we're actually focusing in Thessaloniki to see if they are already there or not, and if we can move further on the experience side. And the 3 other parts are like the safety, the aesthetic, and the point of interest within 1 kilometer. So how many places can one visit by walking an average 1 kilometer? And we had a very simplistic walkability overall index that takes the average of each of these groups and takes a mean value for the walkability. Each of these groups was individually assessed, and then we just had the one common walkability index. As I said, we had this survey based on that, and we wanted to record and make known the citizens' opinions on these different 4 groups. And we had a tool, maybe some of you are already familiar with these questionnaires. So it's the News and Alpha questionnaires are very much popularized and also very much applied already in walkability surveys, at least in the past years. So since that was also part of a thesis, we wanted to have a validated tool, and we tried to use the best elements of this tool and combine it for the local aspect, and created a Greek urban environment-based walkability questionnaire. We had like these 3 different sections. We had some personal and demographic characteristics to also get an image on what the people say and what are their own identities. And then we had 7 functional characteristics questions, 10, 5, and 3 for each of the rest of the 3 groups of walkability. And as I said, we also focused on the local aspects of main problematic areas and barriers in the pedestrian environment. The data collected was for 10 days in autumn 2017. We used the convenience sampling, mainly focused on student population, but also we conducted some on-site interviews with a tablet in the main center square that I showed you before in the image, in the photo ahead, just to be able to get the opinion from the people who don't have access to websites like older people. So in the on-site interviews, we focused only on older looking people, let's say. In total, we had 300 participants, quite balanced between the gender, also considering that the student population, it was a little bit more men-based, at least in the civil engineering school that I were. So that explains this balance in the gender distribution. And then when we started the research, actually, we're trying to see what is the focus. Like we have a big city with many different municipalities, like 12, as you can see in each of these blocks in this QGIS screenshot. How can we say that we analyze the walkability of the whole city? So, of course, we couldn't, and it wouldn't be a good step forward because it's so different. So, as I showed you, there is the hilly part, there is also the city center, there are the pedestrian zones. So, we decided to have the level of analysis defined on the zip code level, which gave us quite some good distribution of space in the city center. This is the central area. But of course, in the bigger suburban municipalities, the zip codes were quite big. But still, these are not all habited. So we know that, let's say, a first limitation of this approach, that taking the zip code level, is that you have different distribution of space and different sample size or population in each of these municipalities or zip codes. So the majority of the sample was from the city center, so that's good because we have so many different split zip codes there, more than, so we could still do analysis in the different zip codes there. I'll just give some results that I think they're more relevant to present. So let's say from the functional characteristics, the first one we assessed was the pavement infrastructure. So each one of these items was measured with a Likert item, and then the whole functional characteristics were a Likert scale, combining these 10 items. And we assessed each one of the items separately, but also the scale in total. And this is the first, the pavement infrastructure. For example, looking at the pedestrian ramps, we saw that in none, the question was formulated, do you think that your neighborhood environment around your home, so around the zip code that you're living, is covered by pedestrian ramps? And then people could respond from 1 to 5. And it was like the width of the pavements was okay, but when coming to the pedestrian ramps, most people said that it's actually not fully covered. And that it was also true even for the quite pedestrianized city center of Thessaloniki. Looking on more barriers and more difficulties that pedestrians face, we examined the barriers on the pavements. And as you can see here, the main square part, this red block, is actually the most well and highly evaluated. So the darker the color, or the more red the color, the higher the evaluation score. So these are actually scored perfectly, let's say, and that was common for all people living there, that at least in terms of barriers, this pedestrian open space offers quite a nice place to walk around. And then since it's a very local case study issue, is the vertical movement. We examined it. For some places, it was not relevant because it's completely flat. But then for some places, especially in the peripheral areas, like this one is quite a hilly part, and we saw that the objective measure elevation was also an issue for the pedestrians' perception. This is the hilly municipality I referred to. And then we looked at the safety. So moving a little bit more from the experience side of the safety, we had both objective measures like the crossing of the frequency, but also a sense of safety and the sufficiency of lighting. And we saw that also some correlations arise when you have such different questions. For example, if I asked someone if they feel safe to walk in their neighborhood at night, that's quite highly correlated with their perception of the lighting sufficiency in the area. So it kind of shows how much the light doesn't show a causal relationship in our case, but we can conclude that those two are quite close in their scoring, but also in the actual experience effect. Going a little bit to the aesthetics, we had the greenery included, the cleanliness, the stray animals, which is quite sometimes a big issue in Greece and in Thessaloniki in specific. And we saw that in the aesthetic, the better conditions were in the suburban and not in the dense urban center, although the urban city center is quite livable. When it comes to the aesthetic part of greenery and cleanliness, then it's actually been rated less than the rest, and this is like quite a forest green area, and it was quite highly evaluated in that sense. And the last part is the point of interest, which comes a little bit contradictory to the last results. So where the evaluation is a bit higher on the points of interest, is a bit lower on the actual aesthetics. So that kind of gives a direction that although most people can move around many places there, they actually don't face the best conditions, and that gives also an equity issue of who gets the better greenery or the better aesthetics in the pedestrian environment. Is it the majority of people who move around the dense environment, or is it the people living in the streets, let's say some urban settings? And that's like the overall walkability scores. As I said, it was just the average used from the different groups. And here we also see that we have different colors. So we had none, I think only one had a continuously low score. And the rest were higher in some parts and lower in others. Like as I said, the city center was very high in the points of interest and in the proximity of them, but lower in the cleanliness or the greenery. And that's the worst, let's say, area of Thessaloniki. This is close to the train station, which is also common. But like in many cities, train stations are quite not the best and most friendly environment for pedestrians to walk around. And they also related to the sense of safety that was quite low and in worst in the aesthetic part, actually. A very brief discussion on the findings we had. So looking at overall on how people respond to such a walkability questionnaire, we saw there is perception heterogeneity. So indeed, different people even living from the same area or having some different socio-demographic characteristics, they have different perception of how much they like their environment, which could also be related to how often, for example, they are exposed to it. So how long they walk. For example, in a city center with a very dense zip code network, it is expected that someone does not actually consider their neighborhood environment only their zip code, because all the neighborhoods zip codes are so close one to each other. And we found this kind of correlation indeed, that someone who lives, let's say, on zip code 1 and zip code 2, and they are in one next to each other, they kind of tend to have the same perception, which shows a bit of how much also the surrounding area, not only the location of your house, affects your walkability and how far you can go and how much you like to walk around. We found a lot of that, especially for the safety, where we had a significance agreement, and we also had a significant agreement on the microclimate perception. So how much air pollution do people feel that there is in the air when they walk around? On the local finding side, this approach allowed us to assess their functional characteristics. And as I said, we found that in Thessaloniki it's still low, which was contradictory to other past research, at least on a similar European level cities, where the functional characteristics are sometimes already taken for granted. But in this case, we found that there is still need to focus on that further, so to allow people to walk, first of all, before creating even the better conditions for them. And on the peripheral areas, that the lack of infrastructure was especially noticed. Although the greenery is there and the aesthetics might be higher, when it comes to functional characteristics, there is a huge disbalance between the areas of Thessaloniki. And as expected, we found a positive correlation between ground incline and the lower perception or difficulty in walking due to the hilly areas. And of course, many things can be done, and just a very brief idea of what the people they propose. So in the survey where they had the main barriers, they could also propose what they think they should do first, and we had a list, and then they could say it's the surveillance, it's about the cleanliness, it's about the user-centered urban planning, or it's about having a better disciplinary, multidisciplinary cooperation in the city and in the local government of the city. What could be best? And those all came up, and of course, usually they come up, and the next step is to decide where can we look first. So thank you all. Let's discuss and connect as well. You can find me on LinkedIn, or if you have any questions, you can also send me an email. And I have added the link of the publication we have with my colleagues and supervisors actually from Thessaloniki. So just let me know for any questions or remarks you might have.
Great. Thank you so much, Roxani. We already have, I think, several questions in the chat. Mohammed, did you want to go first with your question?
Okay. I mean, I have other question, but let's stick with the population of the city. Someone said you mentioned about the population of the city about 1 million, but I'm not sure. Do you know about the population of the city right now, or the time you were doing your research?
Yeah, it's around 1 million, the whole area we covered. But of course, because it's also a student city, it actually goes to around 1,200,000 when all the students are present in the city as well.
Thank you.
I saw a question from Jill King about the RAMs.
Yeah, just I just wasn't sure if that was a language issue. When you said that the ramps were not fully covered, what did you actually mean by that?
That the neighborhood is not fully covered, not the RAMs. That the neighborhood is not, let's say the area is not fully covered. So there is not a ramp at each pavement.
Corner. Yeah. So
yeah,
at each corner.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I thought that might be the case. Otherwise, I was thinking, oh yeah, that's what we actually need. We need covered ramps.
no.
Covered
Yeah. It's area coverage. Yes.
And I had another question too. What did I ask? Oh yeah. So when you're showing the maps with the different colors, the red is good and yellow is not good.
Yeah, the lighter the color, the red is better than the yellow, and the yellow is better than the white.
Yeah, okay. And with the suburban areas, you use the same methodology in all the areas?
Yes.
And it was so it's all just focusing on subjective measurements and things, perceptions.
Yes, so it was stated from the respondents. Like we didn't validate it with, let's say, how many crossings there are indeed there, or how much greenery there is. We didn't use this kind of measure, if that's what you're referring to.
So it was just like a questionnaire rather than actually looking at a particular area and seeing how that worked, like a particular street or anything.
Yes, the data, they all came from the same questionnaire, yes.
Okay, thanks.
I have another question. Okay. The term aesthetic, am I right? Did you pronounce it very well?
Yes.
Okay, so in my language, it means something that deal with beauty and something like that. So people have different points of view, and I thought that about 300 individuals who answered the question, there are 54% of the women, and women are more precise about details and about the beauty of everything than men. Okay, and how did you deal with that? And people answer differently. Someone might say that I love, for instance, flower buds in my alley, and the other one might say that no, I like a covered street only. So, how did you deal with that? Because you have different points of view, and it might affect the result.
So we didn't ask people about the aesthetic. So we asked them about, so aesthetic is the group of questions that we name, but the people didn't know that is named aesthetic. So we had the different items. So as we have these different 5 aesthetic questions, 5 aesthetic related questions, and then actually they were, so it was about greenery, about cleanliness, about spray nano. So the people were seeing only the items. So one question referring to their satisfaction with greenery, for example, one question with the cleanliness, and not how do you like the aesthetic. So not the umbrella item, but only the individual items that refer to a specific aspect.
Yeah, I got it. You mean they weren't direct questions about the authentic.
No. Aesthetic is
Okay,
like just the literature group, or let's say the literature group that covers these items together.
Yeah, in my country, I see some students asking directly because it affects the whole survey. Yeah.
It's a good point. Yeah,
Well, Roxani, I want to say I find this super interesting, and that you're also looking at perceptions, because I'm embarking on my PhD and working on a survey, on a questionnaire that's all about psychology of mobility choice. I'm starting broadly, as you know, I'm interested in walkability, but my pilot survey is starting with broad urban mobility. So I'm exploring challenges in survey development, actually. So I'm kind of curious to hear from you some tips, any challenges you encountered in survey development. Also, how did you distribute? Did you print, digital? Also, what tool did you use to distribute?
I think because, so let's say that was my kind of first project, and since then I have done quite many surveys. I'm also doing one right now for my PhD on mode choice. I don't know what's in general. I think having a pilot is for sure a must on whatever survey you do. You need a pilot and you need to make it readable. That is, I think, at least from the perspective of knowing if what you ask people can understand. Because if they don't understand, as Mohammed said, then it's not a valid one. Then when it comes to the selection of because you cannot have a really long survey, usually in 1 hour. So I think that's the hardest part, selecting which things you ask and how you ask them. And you have to, I would say, one has to narrow it down as much as possible that you get the basic data from out there, because even with just some not very extensive data set, like especially from a survey where the error is already there because of the bias, we can still do a lot of analysis afterwards. So I don't know, and then it's really dependent on what you're looking. For example, in this case, because I was also at the starting point, we really strived to use these highly validated questionnaires, and then we realized we couldn't use them as they were, of course, because it's different. It was, I think, USA-based or pan-European level-based indexes, so we had to adapt. So I think the adaptations. So take as much advantage as possible from existing tools or indexes, or like especially with, for example, with psychology, we have this perceived stress scale, for example, which is very common in our mobility surveys now. Don't create another stress related question. I would say that's the best. I think there are more qualified psychologists than our humble mobility people to develop the tool about the stress. We can adapt it. We can try to not have it as it is already there, but I will trust that, especially when it comes to psychology, I will try to get advantage of existing tools.
That's really great point. And then also distribution. Did you do all digital or at all some print?
So in this one, it was all it was a Google form, I think, back then, before the GDPR. It was a Google form, and then I had to do this face-to-face interviews, because I wanted also to have the perception from older people. And if you do it only via distribution of a link and not from a panel company, then it's very low the chance that you get older people involved in these online questionnaires. So unless, you need some good contact. And for example, now we are in a project that we want to do equity analysis on more choice, and there we need like stratified sampling exactly with how many older people are lower income. And usually there you also need either paper and base or at least on-site distribution of the survey.
Right, that's a really good point. Yeah, I'm planning on doing paper, particularly for the inclusiveness aspect and elderly individuals. Mohammed had a question. How many questions were on your survey?
How many questions? Oh, so let's say 10. I think 25 items were from the walkability, and then in total around 35, 40. I cannot remember by heart. I think in total we had 35 questions. We saw the socio-demographic and the barriers, so part A and part C included.
And Gil, you had a question?
Yeah, it was, did you, were the people selected at random, and did you include just various people with different sorts of disabilities in your sample? And were there any people with disabilities?
We had 2 people answering the survey, but they were not, for example, not hearing or visual impairment. It was a movement impairment, but still not in a wheelchair. So they had assisted walking equipment, but they were moving independently. And that was one of the limitations from, it is one of the limitations of the study, because as I said, we were focusing mostly on student population, so younger ones, where the chances of finding people with disabilities, it's less. It's still there, but we didn't do a stratified sampling for that. So we had just a convenient sampling, as I said.
So the people with disabilities, they weren't like selected because they had disabilities. It's more that they just were in your sample and happened to have disabilities. Is that how it worked?
Yes, because we had convenient sampling. Yeah, we didn't use any predetermined user group in the focus.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a nice grouping of people here. Do other people have questions?
I go first. So, I remember you said that the city is kind of more student city. I mean, is it more international students? I mean, are there students from across the board or other parts of the country come to that city?
Do you mean the student population?
Yes, yes.
It's mostly Greek students. There are also international students, but I don't think they combine maybe maximum 5% of the student population or even less. So there are Erasmus students around, but I think we didn't have any in the sample at the time, because it was also in early October, and the semester starts in early October. So most of the Erasmus students were, I think, still in a partying mood. So it was hard to catch them. Yeah.
I think was Audrey raising her hand?
Yeah, Roxani, I want to say that your presentation was quite insightful. Thank you for that, because for me, I'm also researching about sidewalks and the quality of sidewalk quality, the impact it has on pedestrians' walkability. And you say that you interviewed 2 disabled respondents, and what did they have to say about the general sense of walkability in the city, or you didn't ask about this? Like, what was their perceptions?
We had one question on the total, how much they like to walk around in the neighborhood, and I think the evaluation was average. So like from the total sample, it was an average evaluation. So not low, not high. And that was kind of reflected as well in the total walkability score afterwards, that more or less in total, the overall score was a little bit in the medium of the Likert scale we used. And of course, there were, I think, because we had also this kind of contradictory items. So indeed, in the dense urban city center, for example, we had high proximity to points of interest. But on the other hand, we had low, let's say, aesthetics. And in the suburban areas, it can be the different. We have high aesthetics and low. So I would say that although we got this result, a next step would be to actually have weighted factors. And I think that's the good direction to go, that we don't take the average of all in your overall walkability, but you weight the factors that are also more relevant in the more local context than in this big area of the whole city. And good luck in your research.
Thank you. I was just asking if maybe you could share a link to your paper. I would love to read it.
Yeah, sure. I'll.
Thank you.
So Gil had another question about disabilities, and I think for me, this brings up sort of, I think maybe we can approach this philosophically too, because for example, I'm developing a survey and there is, my pilot includes nothing about disability. Actually, it doesn't even include anything about gender, which I realize I probably should add that. So what are your thoughts, Roxani, on the need? I mean, there are clearly walkability studies. If we're looking specifically at issues of access, we have to do targeted samples. But what are your thoughts about various walkability questionnaires and representation of various groups, right?
I think that comes let's say to the socio-demographic of it. So and also to the realism of how much data you can collect. If you really want to focus on access and the equity in the accessibility, then you need to have more focused questions on the exact disabilities or like difficulties that people face. And there are quite many questions that you can include on that and validate it. Matters is also to get how much of level of disability one has, and that should be the focus. And I think, for example, if I had this focus in my mind back then in this research, or if I did it in the future again, I would maybe focus on the functional characteristics and then have more accessibility related, and then increase the survey part on the socio-demographic, and more also put effort on the data collection from people with disabilities. But because it will be an accessibility or walkability, actual ability to walk around research. So I think depending on the focus, you can deviate how much effort you put for the collection, but also for the design for the different groups of population.
Right, it's a really interesting thing to discuss, and it's giving me the thought that of course we can host in the future individuals who are doing disability specific research, because Gil, I'm sure you would agree, I mean, this is a whole area, it's absolutely essential for specific research to be looking at disability, not just always in the broad surveys, I think. So that would be interesting to learn about, perhaps who we can host for future roundtables. And if you
I was just going to say, it also picks up on some of the trolling I've noticed when we've shared a few things like flooded paths or whatever. Well, why don't you just walk around the puddle? Or, why don't you just step over the lifted pavement or something like that? People just being totally ignorant of and dismissive of people's different abilities. And
True.
so we sort of recognised that people with disabilities were our natural allies. So that's why we're partnering with our local disability advocacy groups and older people advocacy groups.
Gil, that's great. But I think it is also important to remember when we host researchers that disability might not always be a dimension in the work. In the work I'm doing, it's not a dimension, and I of course hope there will be in my sample people of varying disabilities, but that could easily be a whole nother 10 questions. What is your disability? You know what I mean? It really brings up an interesting research question about representation. So that's why I said, I hope we can bring in people, please feel free to drop names, who really do focus on disability research, because that's an area deserving of entirely of its own, but that as researchers, we can also be aware of that dimension and also be honest that's not, for example, my questionnaire doesn't have capacity to really get into that and to explore various disabilities, but it's interesting to think about how we could touch on that in the broader questionnaires.
or even looking at other methodologies. So we've put in for a grant to do some local neighbourhood walkability, just audits at a very detailed level, and it's something I've been wanting to do for ages. But when I mentioned it with my main disability ally, he just said, "Oh yeah, absolutely." And there was actually a couple of people in wheelchairs who've done video. So what I was thinking of was like just video about what the condition of the walking environment is like, but also what it's like if you're in a wheelchair or something like that. And there's a couple of people who did it in Brisbane. They've done it through TikToks. It got picked up on a local media report, but I haven't been able to find them because I'm not on TikTok. But that's just another way of doing it. It's very subjective. This is what it's actually like for me.
Right. So we can have other roundtables too, where we really get into that more. And when we do host people that perhaps don't have that dimension in their research, sort of understand the limitations too. I think I understand that there is there's a need to be inclusive, but we can get into other areas of inclusive representation that we're leaving out of the discussion right now, even in focusing on disabled, for example. So Mohammed mentioned about students and commuting to schools. Roxani, how's the situation?
No, definitely most of our students don't have a car. They might have, if they are from Thessaloniki, let's say, they might have one available in the household, but otherwise it's not that common because the university is right in the city center. At least 70–80% of it is in the city center. So most students live also around and either walk or take the bus. Less common the bike, much less common, but the car is really, really low percentage of commuting students. For professors and like teaching staff, it's common that they commute by car, but not for the students. But they might use it for other trip purposes, just not for commuting to their education. It's a car-friendly city in terms that it does not favor the other modes, but it's not that also convenient to move around by car, because of course you get congestion or like long queues or like a lack of parking places. So it's more car-friendly, let's say, than bike-friendly, but it's not a car-friendly actually. It's not driver-friendly.
Okay. So people first to walk. Yes.
Roxani, I'm curious if you're interested in sharing a bit about your current work.
Yes, why not? So as I said, I'm an advocate in Vienna. It's an Institute for Transport Studies here. So we are doing a lot of mostly related to travel behavior research, at least the group that I belong to. I'm currently doing different projects together with my PhD. My PhD topic is about choices of micromobility users. So how they choose their mode of transport, how they choose their route of transportation, including current behavior, but also stated choice experiments and how they would do it under hypothetical circumstances in the future. That's the topic, but we are also doing quite a lot of research on satisfaction determination or usage determination, and colleagues of mine are working a lot with VR environment or simulation-based mobility. So it's a little bit of everything around travel behavior. I always have an eye on the active mode, so that's why I had a big interest on walkability and pedestrian traffic.
Roxani, in that research and also in the Thessaloniki one, did you ask, or are you looking at how far people walk or are willing to walk, both and time?
Yeah, so in the one in Thessaloniki, we had only limited to 1 kilometer around, so I didn't look at how far they went as an overall walking behavior. In our current research, for example, for shared bikes or shared scooters, we always have this access or regress time as under review. So how much are people willing to walk towards or after leaving a vehicle? Or also just for walking, how much they walk now, but how much they would be willing to walk in terms of distance and time. And of course, that's also subjective.
Okay, while we wait for some more questions, Roxani, since this is the first roundtable in this series, I would love to also get your
Can I
thoughts.
pop up?
Hi, Maria.
Can I pop up? Hi all.
Hi.
I'm sorry I missed almost the whole presentation. I would like to welcome Roxani in the group. I'm also from Greece, Roxani.
Nice.
So welcome. I'm sure your work is amazing because I Googled you a lot. So well done for that. I would like, if you have the whole presentation, to have a look after it, or I can watch it on YouTube, the whole roundtable. I just wanted to pop up and say congratulations and welcome.
Glad to meet you. Yeah, I thought you were Greek as well, so it's good. Nice to meet you. I'll just share the presentation probably via email. I just have to put some references I think that are missing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was absolutely fantastic first roundtable. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. It has been some years since I finished this, but it's always in my heart, let's say. So it's good to come back to this.
I think it's kicked off a lot of thoughts, among us. Oh, what about this? What about that?
Roxani, since you're in Vienna, I thought it'd be kind of neat to round off on maybe a personal note too, just about your perceptions about Vienna, mobility and living in Vienna, moving around Vienna, just some personal thoughts.
Yes, so Vienna is nice. Coming to mobility, it has quite an extensive public transport network. I think even though it's not designed as this 15-minute city, in most of the cases it is, because it has quite a dense environment, but not so much vertical building yet in most of the parts. So also the shops are spread around, and it's quite easy to find anything you want within a walking distance or a walking public transport. It has quite a pedestrianized area, so a lot of parks, let's say, and it's really what surprised me a lot, even when I came as a tourist, is that you see so many more people, for example, comparison to Greece, on wheelchairs, moving around independently, or even tourists coming to Vienna, just a block of tourists in wheelchairs and feeling confident and safe to navigate the city themselves in a wheelchair. And that was my first, let's say, surprise in Vienna when I came. And while I live here, I still see it. Of course, not everything is accessible. Especially, I think in the shops, it's still I don't know. It's different than some other parts of the world, because the urban space, I think it's more pedestrian friendly than the private space. So sometimes you look and you see like very friendly malls, but you don't see a very friendly environment to reach them all. In Vienna, it might be the opposite sometimes, that you have a very nice pedestrian environment around, but when you arrive at the destination there or a public building, you might face a difficulty inside. A common question I get from colleagues when they visit Vienna is, why is it not that bike friendly? And it is. For example, living in Greece and the Netherlands, I would say Vienna is somewhere in the middle. So you can bike. even with the children, like you can, but you don't see independent children like teenagers so much alone. You see adults. And I think Vienna did quite a lot of effort in making it more pedestrian friendly in the urban space. That forgot the bicycle for quite some time and is now investing in that. So I would say the average, maybe it's pedestrian and public transport and then cycling. And regarding of car, although I live here only 1.5 years, I see quite some measures for reduction of car usage. The city center is quite, it's excluded cars, but also we have this, in all of the districts of Vienna, we have park limit. So it's only allowed for the residents to park. Until last year, it was also allowed for externals by payment, but now it's actually almost exclusive for residents or like hotel visitors that they can park. For the logistics part, I'm not that familiar, unfortunately, but I think there are specified hours and timetables where people can actually do the logistics part. And that includes private persons, but also companies. Yep, that's the first impression. It's a nice city to walk around, I would say. In maybe 70% of its area, it is quite easy. And beautiful at some parts, of course. The aesthetics play a role in that.
Okay, I just want to mention too about participants here. We have 2 fellow research scholars in India, Nancy and Vituparna, and Professor Bonato in Brazil, Agnes in Cameroon, Audrey who spoke in Brussels. I just like to reference all the people who are here. This is a great international spread for our first roundtable in the series. Gil in Australia, Maria in Greece, and Mohammed in Iran. Mohammed, you have a question?
Yes, but it's not related to your experience about Vienna. It's about the presentation. I remember you mentioned about walkability index and there were safety. May I ask about the safety questions? Because I believe you didn't ask them directly. And my master is also about the safety. So I'm looking for that. How did you ask those questions?
Hi, could you repeat the question?
I remember that there were a page when you were a slide, okay, and when you were presenting, it's about walkability index synthesis, I guess. So there were attempt safety in the middle, and I'm beginning to see how did you ask questions in terms of safety?
It was, if I recall correctly, excuse me if it's mistaken, but I can email you later. I think it was more of agreement to a statement. So I feel safe to work around at night, for example. And then we had to rate on an agreement scale. I think that's how it was posed.
May I ask you to email me that part, if it's okay?
Yes, I don't think that, I remember if the questionnaire is on the paper. I sent the link.
Okay.
Let me just check. I'll check, and you can drop a message to me on LinkedIn later on, and then I'll send you.
Thank you.
Welcome. But it was in Greek, so yeah, I'll try to make a.
No, I want to have a glimpse of what was the question about safety. Yeah.
Hello. Hi, Nancy. Am I being audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hi, I am also a research scholar. I'm from Madurai, India. Sorry for the panting. I've got to go somewhere and I'm walking. So I just wanted to ask you, I've already come across your paper and I was wondering who this person is, and she's done such a good work. And thank you, Anika, for making us meet through this roundtable. So what I wanted to ask is how earlier you were in an answer to somebody else's question, you mentioned, Roxani, that it is a car-friendly city. It is car-friendly, but cars cannot really move around, and it is not bike-friendly, but there are a lot of bikes. And can you just elaborate on that? How are we to, you know, define that it is car friendly? I mean, what will be the attributes we are to define the car friendliness or bike friendliness or even pedestrian friendliness?
Yeah.
I mean, I hope I make sense.
Yes, it's a good question. I don't think I can reply to it of what defines a car friendliness or bike friendliness, but at least the way I stated, or we kind of usually characterize Thessaloniki, is because what comes into the priority of the design and what comes into the priority of the maintenance of the network and what comes into priority in the travel time. So if the network is designed for reduction, for minimizing the car-based travel time and not the cycling or the pedestrian or public transport travel time, that's one indicator. The other one is, for example, when you have adverse weather, like let's say we have snow sometimes, what is the first infrastructure being cleaned? Is it the car road or is it like the pavement? So I think, and there, of course, there is also the safety. Who gets, is it the speed flow friendly to a driver or friendly to a pedestrian or just a person standing nearby? So I think it's a very broad term. I might also have used it wrong, but let's say it just sums up the overall approach in the everyday design that you face while in the city. Because if I put it in a very detailed scale or like in a model, what makes a car-friendly city, then it's very complex to define it. But at least looking at some of these indexes, as I said, like this priority or like the pleasure in the environment, that makes it a car-friendly and not a pedestrian-friendly city. Up to extent, of course, right? We are maybe for an average person is less noticeable. But for a person who wants to make a city more walkable, it's easy to notice. So it's nice, still nice to walk around, but if you look at it from a design perspective, then it's not prioritized, let's say.
Right. I get your point, because I've been trying to do the same for my city, Madurai here, whether it's not walkable, that's very obvious, but trying to define it in a maybe it is car friendly, and that is a problem. I could just blame it like that. I was not able to find any attributes either. So I was wondering if you had done something like that. Right. So we're all in a fix then. Good to know that. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no more questions. Oh, you have a question, Mary?
I didn't have actually a question, just wanted to add my perception about Thessaloniki. I would say as a visitor, though not as an expert, I would say that Thessaloniki has a great environment, is a beautiful city. If we can say that beauty is important in order to walk to a city, but it has a very walkable downtown city center, but a really not walkable neighborhoods and suburbs. It's actually a city that has its eyes on the sea. So there's a lot of interrelation and connection to the sea, and the views and the vistas has very, very good plazas, important plazas with nice looking buildings. So it welcomes you to walk, but it welcomes you to walk mostly around the big squares in the city center and around the seaside area. And it's also a city, I've lived a lot of years in Athens and I was visiting Thessaloniki like once per year. So it's a city that a lot of young people walk and talk and stay outside the bars and the cafes, that they stay in the plazas. And it's very important because in Greece, this is not very common. Usually the young people go out in cafes and bars, but they don't spend a lot of time in public space. Thessaloniki has these important attributes in terms of public space and public sitting and also walkability. I imagine that my student view, Roxani, reflects on the actual way that Thessaloniki is right now.
Yeah, I think I agree. And of course, if you compare it with Athens or a bigger city, it's also, that's why I say it's the point of reference. It's different looking at it with the eyes of someone who wants to make it more walkable rather than a tourist. So, but it's indeed the city center. I think also that was kind of a nice finding from our research, that at least the city center is higher valued than the rest, at least in this overall vibe of the city. So well said, I agree.
Okay.
Just picking up on that comment, that observation, Maria and Roxani. I wonder, is that because, I think Roxani, you said it was like a university town, a student city. Just thinking, because students are usually poor, so they get around with free transport, walking and bikes and things.
It's not on bike, so cycling is quite low. I think it's less than 5% of everyday trips number, but it's more walking. So as a student, usually, because of the university being in the city center, then it's more about walking around. Whether you like it or not, it's also your only choice, more or less. So it becomes quite vibrant because of that, because there are always students walking around.
And you know what comes to my mind right now, when you said that, Thessaloniki is a city actually that you can find parking almost in the heart of the city, in the heart of the city center, near the key landmarks. It's I'm not sure if it's car friendly. I'm sure it is in technical terms. I'm not sure if it is in in citizen terms, but Thessaloniki has a lot of parking areas and has a lot of on-street parking in streets that could be way more pedestrian friendly or cycling friendly. And I imagine that we were collaborating for a study related to urban mobility in the city center. And I remember that I haven't seen like so many parking areas in so central places of a city, of course, except of Athens, which is a whole different story. And also an important thing about Thessaloniki is that there's a massive infrastructure coming. I'm not sure if Roxani mentioned it, because it's the metro is coming in Thessaloniki, suburban, underground railway is coming. And if the plans are going to be materialized someday, I'm sure it will be mostly, especially around the central stations, it will be a lot more walkable. Hopefully, at least.
Okay. Anything else anybody would like to share or ask Roxani?
I would like to share something, and I search again the net and see that the city is much more deep in history and culture from the Roman Empire. Am I right?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear very clearly properly.
Okay. So it might be my internet connection. Do you have my voice? Do you have
Yes.
right now? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, I searched the web and noticed that the city is deep in the culture and history. I guess dates back to the Roman Empire. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I think it's a good point to say that the central city is much more walkable than the other parts because it's history. It's a good potential.
Yeah, but it's not history like Vienna, for example, right? It's not recent history with paved roads or like big squares. It's more Roman and Byzantine years. So it's not that you walk in the exact same level as the older city, let's say. So this actually creates quite many vertical disparities in the movement sometimes, or create places where you cannot walk that easily as with a wheelchair or like with any kind of stroller around. So I think, and that's something very quite common, for example, in Greece or in Italy, because we have all these kind of older cities under the current city, and but it's not from the medieval years and afterwards, they are older ones. So the whole infrastructure is a little bit more harsh and a little bit more narrow sometimes. So it's, of course, it gives space. It gives open space, public space, but when it comes exactly on your steps, it's not always in the benefit of the pedestrian.
Okay, so I think that you mentioned about the evaluation of the city. Now, right?
Sorry?
The evaluation, I mean the vertical, yeah, the evaluation,
yes.
yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So
It's
isn't it a problem for senior citizens?
if it is, sorry?
Is it a problem, an issue for senior citizens to walk around the city because of that?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, and
yeah.
that's what I mentioned as well, that it's like
Yeah.
it is an issue for the people, right? And we need more, and that's I think a common issue for most hilly areas, that we need more and more to pay attention on the vertical movement of the people and how they can go overcome this burden that it creates to them, because for sure it creates for people with any difficulty. So we either need to invent to focus on the equipment that we provide to them or the infrastructure that could allow quite hilly movement.
I have a question. Sorry. And now
I just have to leave in 2 minutes,
yeah.
I think. Plus, I don't know if you can go on.
It's about the population of the city. Is it much more young or is it more elder people living in that city?
I would say it's quite evenly distributed, because overall Greece has more and more older population. But of course, as I said, it's also a student city. So when you have 200,000 students, that moves the balance scale of the age distribution closer to the smaller, also quite a lot. So I would say, and it's also a very common city for families. So I think the distribution is there. So in the design part, at least, it's usually not focusing on only one part of the age.
Many thanks, Gkavra. Am I right about the last name, Gkavra? Yeah. Many thanks. Anyway, many thanks.
Okay, as Roxani has to go, I want to say thank you very much for this extremely interesting introduction to your work, and for all the participants too, and so many questions, and for this great kickoff to this series. Thank you, Roxani.
Oh, thank you. It has been a pleasure. It's always very nice to discuss with you all, and I think it's all about learning also more from all the experience. So it has been a great experience for me. Thanks for having me, actually.
Thank you, Roxani.
We will have this on the YouTube channel as well, so I will post this later on this month, so everybody can watch it again and share it, etc. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.